She slapped me, right on the porch, while my neighbors watched. I'm Marian, 64, and I thought I was just offering my son a warm place to land. Turns out, I was walking straight into a storm I didn't see coming. What would you do if your child handed everything to someone and left you with the fallout? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear how you would have handled it. I was on my knees in the yard, trimming the last tired blooms off my rosebush, when I heard the familiar rumble of Ethan's SUV pulling against the curb. The air was crisp with October, a thin layer of frost still clinging to the grass even though the sun had been up for hours. I brushed the soil from my gloves and straightened my back, expecting just a short visit, maybe a bag of groceries he needed me to hold or a forgotten jacket. But then I saw it. 2 large suitcases thumping onto the driveway before I had even waved hello. My pruning shears hung in midair. That rosebush had been planted the year Ethan graduated from college, a tiny celebration of his independence. I'd tended it faithfully for over a decade, each bloom reminding me of the man he had promised to become. Responsible, steady, careful with what he'd been given. The sight of those suitcases pressed against that same patch of soil told me those promises were withering. He stepped out first, shoulders hunched, tie askew like he had pulled it half-heartedly that morning. Ethan's hair was longer than I remembered, untamed, as if a barber's chair had been just another bill left unpaid. From the passenger seat, Sloane emerged, her heels clicking sharp on the pavement, the sound of entitlement. She wore a fitted designer coat, nails polished to a glassy shine, one manicured hand holding a leather tote she didn't bother to zip. Behind them, in the back seat, I spotted the glow of 2 tablets. Jamie and Noah barely looked up, their small faces framed by headphones, lost in a cartoon world where parents didn't haul their lives in rolling suitcases. I forced a smile, because that's what mothers do. You didn't call. Ethan gave a sheepish shrug, already moving toward me for a hug, but Sloane lingered, eyes sweeping across my porch, my windows, as though tallying the square footage. The porch swing creaked under the weight of autumn wind, and I suddenly felt as if my entire home had turned into an exhibit for her appraisal. Inside, the warmth of brewed coffee met us. I poured it into the chipped porcelain mugs I had collected over years, mugs that never pretended to be anything other than what they were. Ethan wrapped his fingers around his cup, but avoided my gaze. Sloane sat with her back perfectly straight, placing her designer tote on the table as if it were entitled to space there. The leather creaked, leaving a faint mark on the polished wood I had oiled just yesterday. We sold the Maple Street house, Ethan said finally, voice tight. The words jolted me harder than the October wind sneaking under the door. That house had been my son's dream once, a place I had helped him secure with a $40,000 loan after his wedding. My late husband's handwriting still lived on that promissory note. It wasn't just money. It was faith. Sold? I repeated, letting the syllables stretch. Sloane smiled faintly, like she'd been waiting for the reveal. 620, before fees. She sipped her coffee as if we were simply trading stock updates. My throat tightened. And where is it now? She tapped one manicured finger against her cup. Expenses. The word hung in the room like a perfume I couldn't wash away. Expenses? I pressed, though I already felt the ground slipping. Cards that needed clearing, she said with airy precision. A wellness retreat, some upgrades, investing in a friend's boutique. Things add up, you know. Her tone was careless, almost smug, as if the figure, $620,000, were as trivial as the change tossed into a tip jar. I turned to Ethan. His eyes were on the mug, not me. Is this true? He nodded once, shoulders curling inward like a boy caught cheating on a test. My chest burned with a mixture of grief and anger. But before I could speak, Sloane leaned forward. So, she began brightly, we'll stay here for a while, just until things settle. This place has plenty of space, and it'll be good for the boys, won't it? She gestured vaguely toward the window where Jamie and Noah's backpacks lay slumped by the door, as if evidence of their innocence would soften me. I stared at her, then at my son. The hardwood beneath us groaned, as if listening in. My hand circled the chipped edge of my mug, grounding myself. No, I said finally. The word was sharp, clean, the kind of word that doesn't beg for understanding. You can't stay here. The room froze. Ethan's lips parted, disbelief carved across his face. The mask slipped from Sloane's expression, disdain flashing before she forced her smile back into place. For the first time in years, I didn't apologize for saying no. She rose, tugging her coat tighter around her. The suitcase wheels rattled across the floorboards, leaving faint scuff marks behind. As they reached the porch, her voice lifted, pitched just enough for the neighbors raking leaves to hear. "She's throwing out her own son!" I felt every pair of eyes from across the street shift toward us. Rose petals drifted down in the wind, scattering across the driveway like pieces of something fragile breaking apart. I stood silently, letting her performance carry into the cool air. My refusal planted deep as roots beneath that rosebush. It was the kind of crisp October afternoon that usually brought kids out on their bikes and neighbors to their porches with mugs of cider. I had just come back inside from sweeping acorns off the walkway when I heard the front door creak open behind me. Sloane's heels clicked on the porch planks, sharp, impatient. "You told Ethan to find a motel?" she said. No greeting, no warmth. I folded the dish towel over the counter and turned to face her. "I told him to think things through." Her laugh was short and high, like glass snapping underfoot. "You embarrassed him. Again. You really do love making him feel small, don't you?" I tried to breathe slowly. "You showed up with no warning, Sloane. With bags, with children. After selling a house I helped fund, and not a word to me." She stepped closer, arms crossed. "So what? You're keeping tabs now? That was our house." "And my $40,000, I reminded her. "For the down payment. I wired it to Ethan the day after closing." "That was a gift," she snapped, eyes narrowing. "You don't get to demand anything back." "I'm not demanding it," I said evenly. "But I do deserve an explanation for how you two burned through $620,000 in under a year." Behind her, the porch light flicked faintly, just once. The Ring camera. It blinked again, then settled. Sloane caught my glance. "You recording me now? Trying to play victim for your retirement crowd?" My hands curled around the towel, not to wring it, but to anchor myself. "This isn't about cameras. It's about respect." She took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "Respect?" Her voice rose like a curtain snapping open. "You want to talk about respect, Marian? You think your little gardening gloves and your smug coffee mugs make you some moral authority?" From the sidewalk, Mrs. Whitaker paused mid-rake. Her golden retriever stopped barking. I kept my voice low. "Sloane, the neighbors." "Oh, let them hear!" she barked. "Let the whole street hear how the sweet old widow turned her back on her struggling son." I moved to shut the door. She blocked it with her arm. "You want a scene?" she hissed. "Fine." Her hand struck my cheek with such force that I staggered half a step back. The sharp crack echoed across the porch like a starter pistol. For a beat, everything stilled, even the leaves. Mrs. Whitaker gasped. Her rake fell into her flower bed. I reached up and touched my cheek. Warm. Tingling. The metallic taste at the back of my mouth surprised me more than the pain itself. Sloane stood frozen, breathing heavily, her eyes wild. Ethan came out of the car just then, carrying Jamie's lunchbox. He saw my hand on my cheek, saw his wife's stance, saw the neighbors watching. He didn't say a word. I turned, walked back inside with careful steps, closed the door behind me. My fingers were trembling, not from fear, but from restraint. At the hallway table, I picked up the phone and dialed 911. "Yes," I said, voice steady. "I'd like to report an assault. I'm at 212 Meadow Lane. My daughter-in-law just struck me in front of witnesses." The dispatcher asked the usual questions. I answered them all calmly, even spelling Sloane's name. As I hung up, I saw Ethan through the lace curtain, still standing by the car, shoulders hunched. 5 minutes later, the sirens came, soft at first, then louder. A squad car pulled up by the curb, and 2 officers stepped out, 1 male, 1 female, both early 30s. They took in the scene, me on the porch, Sloane still pacing near the driveway, Ethan like a statue. The female officer approached me. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "No," I said, "but I was slapped, in front of half the block. Ask Mrs. Whitaker." "I saw everything," Mrs. Whitaker called out from her porch, cardigan half-buttoned, dog leash in hand. She hit her hard, right across the face. The male officer moved to Sloane. Ma'am, we'll need you to stay calm. Sloane scoffed. Oh, this is rich. She's calling the cops on her own family now? Really, Marian? You wouldn't dare press charges. I looked her squarely in the eye. Don't be so sure. One of the kids cried inside the car. Jamie, I think. The officer glanced at the sound and softened his tone. Let's not make this harder for the children. I nodded. Exactly. That's why boundaries matter. Ethan finally walked over. Mom, this is insane. Can we just cool off? Maybe sleep on it? My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She hit me, Ethan, in front of the neighbors, in front of you, and you said nothing. He rubbed his forehead. I didn't think she actually would. But she did. I cut him off. And now I have to respond like an adult, because clearly I'm the only one here willing to. The officers talked quietly among themselves, then asked me if I wanted to file an official report. I said yes. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I said not yet. They offered a courtesy cooling-off notice and warned Sloane she could not return to the property without my consent. Sloane's glare burned like a branding iron. You think you've won something, don't you? I didn't reply. I just went inside and closed the door, this time locking it. In the silence, I made tea, peppermint, the kind that reminded me of winter nights with my husband long before any of this. I stood at the sink, watching the last red leaves flutter from the trees, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the one being cornered. Not anymore. That night, the house was quiet in a way I hadn't heard since Ethan was a boy. No cartoons humming from the living room, no little feet scampering up and down the hall, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the chipped coffee mug from days ago. Cold, untouched. Something in me had stilled, but it wasn't peace. It was resolve. I reached up to the top cabinet above the stove, the one no one else bothered with. My fingers fumbled past old insurance statements and greeting cards until they touched the edge of something smooth. Manila. I pulled the folder down and set it on the kitchen table, right under the glow of the old yellow lamp. My hand hovered over the flap a moment before opening it. Inside lay the promissory note. Ethan's handwriting, clumsy and rushed, had matured little since high school. $40,000. I had loaned it to them 6 years ago when they were starting out. Down payment, closing costs, appliances. We'll pay you back, Mom, Ethan had said, with interest. Sloane had smiled sweetly, her nails already perfect even then. They never paid me back. I had let it sit, dormant, clinging to the hope that time would somehow fix the cracks. But tonight, I read every line. Legal language, notarized signature. There it was, repayment due upon sale of property, with 10% interest compounded annually. They had sold the Maple Street house, and I hadn't seen a cent. A slow breath filled my lungs. I pressed the paper flat and picked up a pen. My signature had always been steady, but this time, it felt different, like drawing a boundary with ink. The next morning, I pulled into a brick building downtown. The law office of Harold Jensen looked exactly like I remembered it. Dark wood, wall-to-wall bookshelves, and a receptionist who reminded me of every grammar teacher I ever feared. I hadn't seen Harold since Daniel died. He had handled the estate with a kind firmness that never wavered. He stepped into the lobby, older than before but still tall, with salt and pepper hair and a suit that managed to be sharp without trying. Marian, he said, his voice warm but curious. Come in. You've stirred up my Wednesday. Inside, the office smelled faintly of leather and lemon oil. Diplomas lined the wall behind him. Yale, Northwestern, Illinois State Bar. I handed him the folder, and he studied the papers silently for what felt like an entire autumn. Then he looked up, one brow raised. Well, he said, tapping his pen on the pad, this is enforceable. I swallowed. Even if he's my son? Harold leaned back. The law doesn't recognize emotional debt, Marian. Only legal ones. You have a signed promissory note, terms defined, no ambiguity. If they sold the house and didn't pay you back, that's breach of contract. And depending on how the funds were handled, possibly fraud. The word sat in the room like a dropped plate. I nodded slowly. I want to proceed. He made a note. We'll start with demand letters. I'll bring in my investigator, Ava Morales. Very sharp. She'll look into how the funds were used. Before I could say anything more, there was a knock. A young woman stepped in. Dark curls pulled into a neat bun, not a speck of makeup out of place. She looked about 30, maybe less, but her gaze was razor sharp. Miss Collins, I'm Ava, she said, extending a hand. I've worked on a few domestic fraud cases. If there's a trail, I'll find it. I almost smiled. Almost. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, papers spread in front of me. I was reading a clause about asset recovery when my phone buzzed. Ethan. I hesitated. My finger hovered over the green icon, then tapped. Mom? His voice sounded tight. Sloan said you went to a lawyer. I did, I said plainly. You don't need to do this, he whispered. We didn't think you'd care about the money. $40,000, Ethan? We were in a bind. You lied. He was quiet for a long time. Then, Sloan said we'd pay you back eventually. You sold the house. That was the trigger clause. You were supposed to pay me back the day it closed. She thought you'd be okay with it being delayed. We had expenses. Did you sign anything else without reading it, or just the loan from your own mother? He flinched audibly. I could hear it in his breath. Mom, please, if you go through with this, Sloan will lose it. I stared at the chipped mug again. Then she'll have company. I hung up. 3 days later, Ava texted. You need to see this. It's worse than we thought. No emojis, no fluff. Just dread wrapped in Helvetica. The next morning, I returned to Jensen's office. Ava was already there, sliding documents across the table. These are withdrawals and transactions from Sloan's boutique account, she said, using the proceeds from the house sale. I scanned the list. Spa retreats, designer handbags, airfare to Paris. The largest transaction, $60,000, had no vendor name. Just the memo. Seed investor, Project Eden. Harold read over my shoulder. She used your repayment funds for private equity? Ava nodded. We also found inconsistencies in the timeline of the house sale and how quickly the money was moved into Sloan's name alone. Ethan's signature appears, but digitally. I blinked. Are you saying... We believe Ethan's signature might have been copied onto some forms, Ava said gently. I folded my hands to stop them from trembling. I want to file. Harold looked at me for a beat, then nodded. Against both of them? Yes. My voice didn't crack this time. Outside, the November wind rustled the brittle trees. A leaf landed on my windshield, golden and curled inward like a closed fist. I stared at it before driving home. That night, under the same kitchen light, I made tea in a clean mug. No chips. I watched the steam rise and felt, for the first time in weeks, something like strength. It didn't roar. It whispered. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about the lines we draw. And what happens when we finally stop letting people cross them. When Ava spread the receipts across my kitchen table, I saw more lies than numbers. It wasn't just the ink, the carefully printed headers, the neat columns of dates and totals. It was what wasn't there, what had never been there. She didn't speak at first, just unfolded one sheet after another, like she was laying out a crime scene in increments. The table, once the quiet center of my morning coffee, had turned into a war room. The chipped mug from weeks ago still sat on the counter, cold, unmoved, forgotten. I leaned forward, careful not to touch anything. Where's the boutique? Ava exhaled through her nose. It doesn't exist. Not legally. No business license, no EIN, no lease. I even checked state filings. Illinois has no record of anything under her name or her alleged business partner. She said it was in Logan Square. Ava gave me a look that said she'd heard worse. She made a few payments to a personal checking account belonging to a Callie Devon. Lives in Evanston. They've been friends since college, but no storefront, no retail inventory, no suppliers. I looked down at the receipts. Sephora, Crate and Barrel, Peloton, a 5-star spa in Michigan. One was just labeled Emerald Lounge for $642. I didn't ask. She spent every cent, I whispered. Ava nodded. And then some. Outside, the rose bush had finally given up its last bloom. The early frost had bitten through the stems overnight. What was left looked brittle, sharp, like a warning. I thought of Ethan's graduation, the day I'd planted it, the speech he gave about responsibility, about building something that would last. Now it stood like a memorial. Ava slid over a different folder, thinner than the receipts. Inside were screenshots, emails, old LinkedIn profiles. This part gets complicated. I scanned the pages. A pattern emerged, one I hadn't dared imagine. There were names of men from Sloan's past, all with similar financial mishaps after their relationships ended. Credit cards opened, joint accounts closed, debt rolled onto their side. One of them had even filed a small claims suit. It was settled quietly. She left a trail, I said. Ava tapped one email. And now she's repeating it. At the bottom of the pile was the name Gregory Shaw. Married, 2 children, owner of a mid-sized construction firm in Naperville. She listed him as a vendor in one of the expense reports she gave Ethan for the boutique. They've been meeting at a hotel in Schaumburg twice a month. My hand gripped the edge of the table. I felt the cold laminate bite into my skin. I'll let Harold know, Ava said gently. This crosses into fraud, possibly conspiracy. I didn't answer. I just stared at the name, Gregory Shaw, and wondered if Ethan had ever suspected, or if he was still clinging to the story she gave him. I walked over to the sink, stared out the window where the rose bush shivered in the wind, and let my thoughts settle. That night, Harold Jensen met me in his office. The same dark leather chairs, the same smell of old wood and soft cologne. He adjusted his reading glasses and thumbed through the folder Ava had compiled. She's smart, he muttered. Sloppy, but smart. She used Ethan, I said, sitting with my back straight, hands folded. He doesn't even see it. He might. Soon. Harold placed a hand on the folder and looked at me. This isn't just civil anymore, Marian. What she's done here, credit fraud, false statements, misuse of funds, it walks a line. Ava mentioned criminal charges. He nodded. We're not filing that, yet. But we'll hold the evidence. See how they respond to the civil suit. The lamp beside his desk flickered slightly. I watched the shadow of his pen as he made a few notes, folded papers neatly, and tapped them into a clean stack. Do you want to include Ethan? Yes, I said before he could finish the question. He signed the loan agreement. He knew about the boutique, or thought he did. He chose not to ask questions. He's your son. I know. Back home, I sat with a cup of tea I didn't drink. The papers were still on the table, neatly arranged now, like the aftermath of a storm. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Ethan's name. Then I pressed call. It rang 4 times. Mom? His voice sounded thin, tired. I need to ask you something, I said, steady. Okay. Ask her about Gregory. There was a pause, the kind that felt like gravity. Heavy, slow, undeniable. What? Ask her who he is and how long it's been going on. Another pause, then quietly. How do you know about... She put him down as a vendor. The boutique doesn't exist, Ethan. She funneled money to a friend. She lied. He didn't respond. I could hear the faint buzz of a TV in the background, the distant sound of Jamie's voice calling for help with something. Ethan didn't answer him. Finally, he whispered, She lied to me. It was the first time I'd heard it. Not from Ava, not from Harold. From him. Ethan. And it cracked something open, something hard and ugly that had been lodged between us. I didn't want to believe it, he continued. She always had an explanation. I thought you were being difficult. I know, I said. I'm sorry. Silence hung between us. But it wasn't the kind that hurt. It was the kind that let the air in. I've filed, I told him, against both of you. His breath caught, but he didn't protest. Before he hung up, he said, Do what you have to do. The next morning, a text buzzed on my phone. It was from Ava. You need to see this. It's worse than we thought. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, as if justice had to be scrubbed clean every morning just to survive the day. I sat still on the worn bench, gripping my travel mug, matte navy, monogrammed with my initials. Not the chipped porcelain from before. That mug had stayed behind, along with the version of myself who once apologized before standing her ground. Cook County's central courthouse looked exactly like it had in the photos. Polished pews, paneled walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed a beat behind the ticking clock. There was a row of heavy coats draped across the back of chairs, boots melting snow into slow puddles. Cold clung to the corners. Across the aisle, Sloane sat next to her attorney. Her navy dress was pristine, her hair set in perfect curls. She looked cinematic. The perfect image of a woman wronged, hands delicately clasped, lashes lowered just enough to draw sympathy. She was always good at playing roles. Ethan hadn't sat beside her. Instead, he occupied the row behind mine, slumped in his charcoal coat, hair longer than I remembered, cheeks hollowed by weeks of no sleep or too much regret. His eyes flickered when he saw me, but I didn't nod. There wasn't anything left to say in a hallway glance. "Calling case 522401, Collins v. Reed," the clerk said. I stood. Sloane did too, glancing at the gallery as though she expected a wave of applause. Her lawyer rose, slick hair, silver tie, expensive briefcase. He launched into a soft-spoken sermon about love turned sour, about misunderstandings and miscommunications. He gestured to Sloane as if she were a saint, a misunderstood wife who gave up everything for a man and his stubborn mother. Then came Harold. Harold Jensen didn't perform. He unfolded his glasses, opened his file, and said, "We'll begin with the loan document." He passed it to Judge Granger. Stern, dark-rimmed glasses, not a flicker of indulgence in her face. She read silently for several seconds. "Signed by both parties?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor. On June 12th, 2019. $40,000, interest included. Marian Collins lent it to her son and his wife to purchase a home on Maple Street." "And repaid?" "No, and now sold without her knowledge." Sloane's lawyer objected. "That money was a gift, Your Honor." Harold cut in. "With respect, gifts aren't documented like this, nor do they include repayment schedules and consequences for default." I watched Sloane's knuckles go white. Next came the security footage, Mrs. Whitaker's ring camera. No sound, but the image was clear. Me standing on the porch, Sloane lunging, my hand flying to my cheek, neighbors looking on. Mrs. Whitaker, bundled in her best cardigan, took the stand. She spoke softly. "I've lived across from Marian for 23 years. I saw it with my own eyes. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a slap." Sloane rolled her eyes so hard the gallery almost leaned. Then came Ava's documents. The boutique filings, or lack thereof. The funneling of funds. Callie Devon. Hotel invoices. A list of charges inconsistent with any real business. Harold read it out plainly. The silence that followed had weight. But it was Gregory Shaw who broke the tension. He shuffled to the stand in an ill-fitted suit. His tie had a coffee stain on it. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Yes, I know Sloane Reed. We were involved. For a year and a half." "And did you know she was married?" Harold asked. He winced. "Eventually, but not at first. And she said they were separated." "She ever mention her boutique?" "No, she said she was investing in stocks." I glanced sideways. Ethan hadn't moved, but his hand was twisting his wedding ring again and again until it slipped and nearly fell. He caught it, stared at it, then pocketed it. Sloane's face hardened. "She's lying," she said aloud. Judge Granger shot her a look like ice. "Miss Reed, you will remain silent." The judge called for a recess. When we reconvened, Harold presented one final document, the tally. With interest, the amount owed had grown to $67,000. No accounting gimmick, no inflation, just debt. Judge Granger's verdict was swift. "This court finds the defendant in breach of contract. I order repayment of the full amount. Furthermore, based on presented evidence, I am referring this matter for further investigation into potential fraud." Sloane gasped. "Your Honor, you may speak to your attorney," Granger said. "But this court is adjourned." The gavel struck. The room didn't erupt, didn't buzz. It just exhaled, like everyone had been holding their breath for 2 years. As I gathered my bag, Ethan approached. He didn't look up at me, just said quietly, "I didn't know. Not all of it." I nodded. But you knew enough. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The pause said more than any apology. As I walked toward the hallway, I passed Sloane. She didn't cry the way she had before. Not dramatic sobs or wails for attention. These tears were tight, ugly, resentful. She leaned close as I passed and whispered, voice trembling, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." I met her eyes. For once, she didn't look untouchable. She looked cornered. I walked out into the Chicago air, crisp, gray, wind curling under my coat like a challenge. Outside, the courthouse steps were dusted with snow, slush forming in patches. But there was something solid in my step. Justice, like the courtroom, might smell sterile, but today it had teeth. A year later, I planted roses again, this time in Arizona clay. The soil was stubborn, pale, almost resentful of water. Nothing like the rich earth back in Oak Park. But the roses didn't mind. They just needed patience, trimming, sunlight, and maybe a little stubbornness of their own. I wore wide-brimmed hats now. SPF 50 was a lifestyle. My retirement home backed up to a walking path lined with stones and a few brave cacti. The neighbors here waved in the morning, nodded in the evening, and mostly left each other alone unless invited. I liked that. After everything, silence wasn't lonely. It was earned. Ethan came down twice a month. He'd traded his suits for uniformed polos, maintenance supervisor at a mid-sized apartment complex. Honest work, steady hours, no pretense, no spa getaways or leased Audis. He always brought the boys when he could. Jamie still liked dinosaurs. Noah had picked up chess. Last visit, he handed me a folded check. "It's not much this time," he said. "It's a start," I told him, sliding it into the side drawer. I didn't count it. That wasn't the point anymore. The checkbook lived next to my HOA newsletter and a small photo of a yellow rose I'd grown from a cutting. I looked at that bloom more often than the check. Somehow, it meant more. The legal process had dragged through summer and into early fall. Sloane had tried appeals, counterclaims, even a GoFundMe she'd dressed up in pastel branding and words like trauma and economic injustice. It raised less than $500. Most of it, I suspect, came from her burner accounts. Then came the real charges: fraud, falsified filings, identity misuse. Harold had called one Tuesday morning and said, "Looks like she's finally run out of curtains to hide behind." I didn't gloat, but I did exhale. That Thursday, I had company. Kayla Reed showed up on my porch with a rental car and a frayed tote bag that looked like it had been through a dozen bus terminals. She was younger than Sloane by maybe 6 years, softer around the eyes. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot. Not messy on purpose like Sloane's chic buns, just real. "I'm sorry to just show up," she said, voice cracking. "I got your address from court records." I offered her iced tea and a shady chair by the patio. It was still warm enough to need both. She looked around, gaze trailing over the gravel garden, the roses, the glass hummingbird feeder hanging low over a potted aloe. "You seem okay," she said finally. I sipped my tea. Takes time and stubbornness. Kayla gripped her tote tighter. Her knuckles whitened. "She's doing it again, to someone else. I saw her at Thanksgiving. She bragged about a guy in San Diego with a startup. She's planning something." She didn't cry, just kept talking. "I tried to warn him, but she's good, like really good. I guess I wanted to know how you walked away without crumbling." I didn't answer right away. A breeze rustled the mesquite. Somewhere behind us, a golf cart buzzed past on the next street over. "I documented everything," I said at last. "Even the small things. I set boundaries, and I stuck to them." Kayla nodded slowly, like she was filing it away. "She always made me feel like I owed her," she whispered. I leaned forward, elbows on the patio table. "You don't. People like Sloane confuse kindness with weakness. But they're not the same. One is given. The other is taken." Kayla looked down. Her tote bag had a tear at the seam. A thread poked out. She plucked at it absently. "Did you ever want to fix her?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "But some people don't want fixing. They want immunity." We sat a while longer. She told me about their childhood, parents who played favorites, a therapist who once suggested Sloane lacked empathy. I didn't need the backstory, but maybe Kayla needed to tell it. So I listened. When she stood to go, I handed her a folder. Inside were copies of court filings, Harold's business card, and a list of steps I'd taken, what to say, what not to say, and where to draw the line. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, voice small. "Because you're not her," I said. "And you showed up." She smiled through her nerves. "I'm glad you planted roses again. They're not as perfect," I admitted, "but they belong here." She left as the sun dipped low, casting long stripes of light across the gravel. I stood by the roses for a while, trimming a wilted petal, breathing in the faint scent, earthy, warm, with the ghost of sweetness. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I tapped it open. "I know where you live." No punctuation, no name. Just cowardice? I stared at it for half a second, then blocked the number, set the phone down, picked up my shears. The roses weren't done yet. When I set the phone down and turned back to the roses, I realized it was never about who hurt me. It was always about how I chose to heal. Over the past year, I've learned to grow things again. In new soil, yes, but also in my own heart. Family doesn't always mean kindness, but choosing to say enough can be an act of love too. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Sometimes it's refusing to let someone else's chaos live rent-free in your peace. At this age, I've come to believe that silence can be the kindest kind of boundary. If this story touched something in you, feel free to share your thoughts. Somewhere out there, someone else might need the reminder. You deserve peace, and you're allowed to protect it.